He's here. Now, broadcasting from the underground command post, deep in the bowels of a hidden bunker, somewhere under the brick and steel of a nondescript building, we've once again made contact with our leader, Mark Levin.
Hello, everybody. Mark Levin here. Our number, 877-381-3811. 877-381-3811. It is exhausting watching TV, isn't it? It's exhausting. This guy said this guy said that, what about this, what about that? I mean, it's full employment for slip and fall lawyers or former federal prosecutors. And it's exhausting. And the media not only won't help in terms of getting through this, the media stokes it. And so I feel it's time to step back and take a serious look at some of this. Rudy Giuliani has said that, from his perspective anyway, the President of the United States will not sit down with the special counsel and his team for questioning because there really doesn't seem to be any basis for it. The President is free to fire Comey. The information Mueller appears to want can be gotten from other sources. So what's the point of the president sitting down? And he's exactly right. But there's more than that. As you know, here on this program, I was the first to point out, 18 months now, I guess, that according to the Department of Justice's official position, a sitting president cannot be indicted. It doesn't matter what I think. It doesn't matter what law professors think. It doesn't matter what anyone else thinks. The official, formal position of the Department of Justice in two memos, one during the Nixon administration, one during the Clinton administration, neither of which has been changed in any respect, is that the President of the United States cannot be indicted while he's in office. Even if you think that's constitutionally unsound, that is the position of the Department of Justice. Mr. Rosenstein, as the acting Attorney General for these purposes, must comply with the position of the Department of Justice. Even more, Mr. Mueller, as a condition of accepting his appointment as a special counsel, must comply with and enforce the rules, regulations, and procedures of the Department of Justice, just as if he was a United States attorney. So then the question is about these sub-issues. If a president of the United States cannot be indicted, according to the position of the Department of Justice, for what purpose, then, is Mr. Mueller, an employee of the Department of Justice, questioning the President of the United States? To issue a report? Well, he's not in business for the purpose of issuing a report, even though he issues a report to the Department of Justice when he's completed. So what is the purpose of questioning the President of the United States? Is it because they want to discern something? They want to learn more information? Then that should be very straightforward. There shouldn't be a need for all this back and forth debate and discussion. Just give them the 10 questions or the 5 questions and they'll answer it. But Mueller doesn't want to do that. One thing is for sure, the purpose of the special counsel is not to serve as an individual who provides a requisite case for impeachment. That's not his job. He's a prosecutor. He's a prosecutor. Now, if I'm wrong about all this, I'm not. But if a court rules that I am, if the Supreme Court rules that I am, then it gets incredibly complex. If the Supreme Court says that the President of the United States must sit for an interview by his own subordinate, then the Supreme Court has to tell us what the conditions are. Are there no conditions? Are there some conditions? Must it be in front of a federal grand jury? Can it be the sort of interview that Bill Clinton acceded to? The issue is about the details at that point. How would such an interview be handled? Is there a subject matter limitation? Or is it open-ended? Is there a time limit? Or is it open-ended? And as process issues arise, as objections arise, who handles that? You go into federal district court, that can be appealed to a circuit court, appealed to the Supreme Court. Just how far does this go? To what extent is the Supreme Court going to sit as a trial court at this point? Now that would be a horrendous usurping of our constitutional order. Horrendous. In that case, the Supreme Court itself would become incredibly powerful, more powerful than it is even now. So this isn't just about an interview with the president. This is a complicated matter. It could become even more complicated. And the Constitution could be further damaged by an irresponsible prosecutor, a special counsel by the name of Robert Mueller. I would counsel the president and his lawyers, as I have from day one, do not sit down for an interview. Mr. Mueller isn't even investigating a serious case. We're now down to whether or not there was one meeting, two meetings, Don Jr. was there, did Trump know about his son's meeting, didn't he know about it? None of it matters. None of it. None of it's criminal. Mr. Mueller's investigation isn't an investigation simply to determine the extent to which there were meetings with Russians and so forth and so on. He's a prosecutor. He's not an ombudsman. He's a prosecutor. You either have a prosecutable case or you don't. And he may not like this. And his subordinates may not like this. And former federal prosecutors may not like this. And federal judges may not like this. But it is the position of the United States Department of Justice that a sitting president of the United States cannot be indicted. And if Mr. Mueller tries, he has violated the rules, the position of his superiors, of the United States Department of Justice. He's not free to do that. Moreover, in addition to that argument, the president's lawyers can make the constitutional argument. Now, what constitutional argument can they make? The very argument that the Department of Justice has made to itself on two occasions. On two occasions. That's the first point. The second point, and I'm sorry that Kellyanne Conway's husband is such a knucklehead, but that's his problem, has been raised by Professor Calabresi and me, which is, given the power that Mr. Mueller is exercising, extraordinary power, more than any United States attorney that I'm aware of, negotiating with the president's lawyers on whether or not he will be interviewed in a criminal case. No U.S. attorney has been doing that. He is clearly a principal officer of the United States government. An inferior or subordinate officer of the United States government wouldn't even be in a position to negotiate with the president's lawyers about an interview. Would not even be in a position to do so. That's, say, well, what about an assistant United States attorney? The assistant United States attorney couldn't do this without approval from the U.S. attorney. So in many respects, Mr. Mueller sits as a U.S. attorney, but actually more powerful than a U.S. attorney. Now, you'll listen to some of these TV lawyers, former judges in some case, and they'll tell you, this was decided in Morrison versus Olson in 1988. This was decided 30 years ago. No, it wasn't. No, it wasn't. This special counsel is different than all the special counsel before him. There's not even a federal statute, as with Ken Starr in the independent counsel statute. He was appointed by the Deputy Attorney General, serving as the acting Attorney General. And the appointment was flawed from the moment it was issued. It was way too broad, and there was no criminal foundation. And it's only gotten broader since. And you have an individual in Robert Mueller who has the capacity to create a significant constitutional problem, a constitutional crisis in this country. An inferior employee of the United States government cannot do so. Cannot do so. He has far more power than an assistant attorney general at the Department of Justice. He has far more power than an assistant secretary of agriculture. He has far more power than the vast majority of presidential appointees who require confirmation by the United States Senate. And I will continue to make the case that this was a flawed appointment by Mr. Rosenstein. And Mr. Rosenstein has failed to keep this public official within his governing limits, and thereby violates the Appointments Clause of the United States Constitution. And that is a very, very crucial provision of the United States Constitution, or the President of the United States could appoint virtually every single senior official, including cabinet and sub-cabinet officials, without going to the Senate for confirmation. This special counsel is different than the other special counsel. This special counsel is different than previous independent counsel. He is the most powerful that I've ever seen. And his authority is not statutory. So they can't even rely on that. This is the kind of discussion that's necessary all over cable TV. This is the kind of discussion that's necessary all over talk radio, in the columns of newspapers, in blog sites, and so forth and so on. Because in the end, this is what it's going to come down to. Not getting into the weeds and listening to every harebrained argument. Mr. Manafort goes on trial tomorrow in the Eastern District of Virginia. Mr. Manafort goes on trial for events that took place before he was campaign manager to Donald Trump for 4 months. For events that occurred before Trump even announced that he was running for president of the United States. To further underscore the point I just made, why is Mr. Mueller prosecuting Mr. Manafort when that could be handled by a United States attorney in the Eastern District of Virginia? Why is Mr. Mueller subsuming the position of the U.S. attorney, taking this case in lieu of the U.S. attorney? If I am Trump's lawyers, and I know they listen to this program, this is yet more evidence and significant evidence that Mr. Mueller is a principal officer of the Department of Justice, not an inferior public official. He's a principal officer. Because now he's stepping in the shoes of a United States attorney to prosecute Mr. Manafort. I'll be right back.
Mark Levin.
If you're concerned about our constitutional order, what's left of it, if you're concerned about separation of powers, if you're concerned about the ability of a president of the United States to do his job while in office, then why wouldn't you raise these concerns? Why don't the media raise these concerns? The Democrats raise these concerns. The never-Trumpers raise these concerns because they don't worry about it. They're not concerned about it. They'll find some outlier lawyer or outlier professor who will dismiss all this, and they'll embrace it because they want to. It's not whether I think a sitting president of the United States can be indicted. It's whether or not the Department of Justice thinks so. Now, let me add another point. The Attorney General of the United States, Jeff Sessions, recused himself as to matters involving the campaign in Russia. But the Attorney General of the United States is doing a grave injustice to the Constitution and the nation by sitting silently on what are these significant constitutional issues. And if they're decided the wrong way, it'll have grave implications for the future of this country. There is no reason that Jeff Sessions can't step in, not to get involved in the investigation per se, but to get involved in the nature of these constitutional questions. And yet he's silent, absolutely silent. I've never seen anything like it. There is no reason that Congress, created under Article 1, shouldn't hold hearings and call Mr. Mueller to testify, not about the specific evidence he has or thinks he has, but on these constitutional questions. For Congress to sit there and allow this thing to potentially explode without participating in this is unconscionable. Instead, we have 4 Republicans on the Senate Judiciary Committee, Grassley and Graham included, who voted to protect Mueller. This isn't about protecting Mueller. This is about the Constitution. Nowhere is there or should there be a roving prosecutor. Nowhere or should there be a man of this kind of power who is a public official who wasn't confirmed by the United States Senate. And yet the Republicans, they control the place. They just sit there. Or worse. I'll be right back.
By now,